Educational management today is undergoing significant changes. These changes are essentially signaled by various fundamental questions. The questions which are raised about the very purpose of education, questions with regard to the content of education, and very often questions with regard to the delivery of education. And the fundamental questions about all these aspects of education have strong implications with regard to the management of education.
Let us have a discussion on the relevance of higher education in broadly two ways. One is the relevance of higher education to society, and the other is a personal relevance that each student has when he or she is participating in higher education. Of course, both of these would be translated in practical terms through a curriculum, through certain syllabi and subjects which are taught. Now,
As we talk about the relevance of education for the society and also for the individual, the concern of relevance is nothing new. It has been there all along. But if it has become a concern today, the reason must be obviously in the content. And as was stated, that this relevance is captured through the curriculum. Curriculum essentially talks about two aspects. One is the basic content that goes into education and also the delivery of education. And therefore, both delivery and content should be looked into in terms of social as well as individual relevance.
My own feeling is that these days there is, particularly because of unemployment in our country, a great deal of questioning of higher education, that it is not useful. And there is also therefore a certain tendency to emphasize vocational courses at the expense of basic theory and understanding. This is all very well, but I still feel that essentially the function of higher education is to develop the sense of personal worth as well as understanding of the world around oneself, through which the individual becomes useful in society.
There is on the one hand the examination system which seems to be not catering to anything else. In a sense it is sort of an end unto itself. And the teaching that is essentially catered to preparing students for the examination system. On the other hand, there is also this pressure on one side to make this entire exercise relevant to make it have an interface with the economy and the job market and so on. Otherwise, there is a criticism as of today about the dysfunctionality between the relationship between the output of higher education and the input of the job market.
Today we are faced with a significant problem, and that is the problem of unemployment. We say that we have lots of educated people around, and still they don't get the jobs. We have coined an expression, educated unemployment. Against this, there is yet another issue. That is, we do have jobs available, but we don't have the right kind of skilled people to fill up those jobs. Obviously, something has gone wrong with the content of our education. We do give such education that doesn't permit jobs to people, and at the same time there are jobs which can't be taken up by people because they are not skilled for those jobs. Something has to be done with the content of our education. We have to bring in that sort of content which can create skilled people, which can create experts who shall fill up the jobs which are looking for men.
To my mind, there seems to be two areas of distortion. I would say the distortion, that determines the perception of students, the perception of relevance on the part of the students of what's happening in the classroom. One is the distortion between what's being transacted in the classroom and what's being asked in the examination, which we talked about a little while ago. And another is the distortion between what's being what's being covered by the exams and what's being expected of them in the job market.
Yes, there are distortions at various levels. There's a gap between what we do in the classroom, what is transmitted to students in a classroom situation, and also later what we ask at the examination. This is one kind of distortion. The second kind of distortion is what we convey in the classroom and what is really needed in the world of life, the marketplace. Now, how do we fill up these distortions? The educational system that has been on for years, in fact centuries, perhaps has never paid any attention to this kind of thing. And it has become much more important these days because the jobs have become specialized. The jobs now ask for special skills, and therefore what is expected by parents as well as learners, that whatever time is spent in an educational institution prepares them for the jobs. And they would also like examinations to be in tune with what is given in the classroom, what is demanded in their real life. So the examination also tests them on that very thing, or those very requirements. It has become now usual that we do get a degree somewhere, and later on when we go on for a job, we have to sit for a different test altogether, and we don't seem to be prepared for that test.
Yes, there is need to bring social transformations, a need for the higher education system to be more responsive. The problems are both complex and interrelated. Amidst all the confusion and lack of clarity, it is necessary to strike at the basic problems that stand out very clearly.
Well, the fundamental problem with the system of higher education in our country and the education system as a whole is that it is being designed and continuously being increasingly modified to serve a very limited purpose of producing the people who can run the administrative apparatus in the country and who can fulfill the requirements of Indian industry. It has not really ever addressed the question of the problems that our society faces and how these are to be resolved. This particular approach of using the education system to fulfill this limited purpose is at the root of practically all the problems of education in this country.
40 years ago nobody said so, because there were not all that many unemployed people. So my submission would be that the system of education and its curricular practice is made more irrelevant because the economy is making you and us, the students whom we send out of the institution, irrelevant.
It is true that education today serves a limited purpose. At best, what we do is we produce people who can work in the secretariat or perhaps industry. But that is not what the society is looking for today. Things are changing, and we have to satisfy those changes. To sum up the entire discussion, views of various people and a few comments on them, we may say something like this, that the education in general has been institution-driven, or one could say product-driven. That is, here is an institution, and the institution has a certain department. This department has to give a few courses, so the students would come, join those courses, pass out of the institution. This is what we mean by education being institution-driven. At times it is product-driven. Say we have a course available, and therefore we must advertise this course, admit students to this course, and the students go through that course, get a certificate, and move into the world of reality. And once they move into the world of reality, they find their education irrelevant. What is needed now is actually, it would suggest, I mean the discussion would suggest, is something what we may call need-driven education. As we think of need-driven education, the implication is that we look for those needs. There are various ways of looking for needs. Maybe there are already some surveys done and we know what the new needs are. Or in certain cases we may have to commission surveys and identify what new needs are. But the broader implication for the total management of education is that we have to think of a new content that will satisfy those needs, and also a new methodology that will satisfy those needs in terms of how students may take those courses. Suppose we think that there is need for reaching remote areas, students in remote places, then we have to think of a different kind of methodology. All in all, the strong suggestion is that we have to think of a different way of managing education now. Now, there are various alternatives available to us. Perhaps one of the best is the system of distance education. Now, as we talk of the system of distance education, the suggestion is not that whatever is already being done is absurd or is meaningless. The point that is being made is that if there are new perceptions, if we feel that we need something anew, something in a different way, something to be done in a different way, then we have to pay our attention to those new requirements, those new perceptions. Now, the system of education as it has come to us, or as it exists today, operates in three different ways. Perhaps we should say a number of different ways, but of those, three seem to be quite prominent. One system is what we call the single mode system. All open universities can be listed under this. Single mode implies that this kind of institution or this kind of operation works in a single way. They are distance education institutions. The second system, which incorporates partly the system of distance education, has been termed as the dual mode system. Now, this is the system where we have conventional universities, and within conventional universities there is a unit, there is a component that deals with off-campus students. The university in the main deals with the on-campus students, but there is a unit which tackles the issue or the admissions and the educational transaction of off-campus students. There is a third system known as consortium system, where a number of institutions get together and they pool their resources in various ways. When I say resources, I don't mean just one kind of resource. Say human resources, expertise, academics, money, funds, and then technology available to people. All these are pooled together to produce courses, and subsequently the participating institutions, they share the number of students, different courses, and they take up tasks in different ways. But of these three, perhaps the more prominent ones are the system known as the single mode system, which is reflected in the form of open universities, and also the dual mode, which is quite prominent, because wherever we see distance education coming in, it has come in through the dual mode system. Now, this system, in a sense, allows a lot of variation. It allows scope for new things to come in. It allows scope for needs to be studied, and it allows scope for systems that may meet those needs. Normally, the approach or the overall system has three subsystems. These subsystems are generally labeled as academic subsystem, the industrial subsystem, and the administrative subsystem. As far as the academic subsystem is concerned, it has two basic components. The first component is where the academics get together with the help of experts of different kinds, editors, subject experts, and then graphic designers, producers, and they prepare the study materials, the course materials. This is one of the major activities. Now, what is the need for preparing materials? We might say that there are textbooks already available in the market, true. But just a minute back, perhaps we talked about new needs coming up. So if there are new needs, those new needs may demand courses of an interdisciplinary type. Therefore, different people have to get together and we have to prepare new study materials. And within the system, the second component is support services. Different students would need different kinds of support, and this subsystem provides for that support. This is broadly the first subsystem. The second subsystem is what we call the industrial system. It involves the production of study materials, whether that is print-based, audio-based, or let us say electronic materials. And the third subsystem is the administrative subsystem, which looks after the management of the entire thing, say finance, let us say finance, and general systems for communication and putting things together. We have just talked about the three subsystems, the academic system, the industrial system, and the administrative system. Now, as we talk about these subsystems, perhaps the real subtleties in connection with the management of all this perhaps are not really clear. And therefore, if we spend a few minutes on the concerns of management, perhaps the issues will emerge more clearly. Now, one of the basic concerns is the assumption of distance education or the system of distance education that the learner essentially is autonomous, has to be looked into. Now, autonomy of a learner perhaps in the Western context might be acceptable because the way the children grow in the West suits the issue of autonomy. They perhaps don't hesitate putting questions, making criticisms, and become critical while they are learning. But such is not the case with us. We are still hierarchical in our approach. We still look at teacher as a god, and this inhibits our learning. Let us take the example of, say, counseling somewhere. And the student would normally, in such a counseling session, expect a teacher to deliver a lecture, for example. Now, this is essentially a cultural issue. How do we overcome it is an issue for the management. Management of distance education should be able to address this issue. The second major concern is the use of technology. There was a time where the entire technology was just the classroom teacher, a blackboard, and perhaps a piece of chalk, some paper, pen and pencils. But during the last 30 to 40 years, educational technology and communication technologies have developed by leaps and bounds. And we have right now technologies available to us which should help us to reach the remotest corners of the country and the people who have never been in the domain of education. But there are some basic questions with this use of technology. Perhaps one of the issues is whether the technology is available to us. The question of access is there. Maybe we have the technology available to us and we can reach our students. That means we can access our students, but can the student access us? We may be able to send a signal through electronic media, through the satellite, to the remotest parts of our country, but is the student able to receive those signals? Now, this brings in a major question. The question is that of the cost and the effectiveness of the system. The technology can help us reaching all parts of the country, but what is the cost? And if the costs are higher, then is it relevant? Is it economically viable? And at the same time, if it is not economically viable, should we give up this idea can we afford giving it up? Because if we don't take it by the forelock at the moment, then we shall be lagging behind. We shall miss the bus, as we say, and the rest of the world will go far ahead of us. Therefore, the management of educational systems has to pay a lot of attention to this issue. They have to balance between what they should be doing, what they can do, and perhaps what really must be done for the future. So there are issues of past and present getting connected with the future. Should we be bringing in technology? If it has to be brought in, the management has to take a lot of care. Think of what funds are available, what kinds of technologies are available, be able to select the best one of them in a particular social context, and then use it. The third major concern for management is the management of change. As we have already said, that we have moved on from earlier types of education to newer types, where we are trying to depend on the needs of the population so as to make education relevant. What it essentially means is that we are trying to manage change. And earlier on, perhaps the change would take a lot of time to come through. But we are now in times when changes take place very, very fast. And therefore, within the management, there has to be a definite component, a definite exercise, a definite input to manage change. A simple example I shall give you about the use of technology. A minute back, we talked about the concern about the use of new technology. For example, it is customary today in distance education systems to have 2 to 3 tier system. We have headquarters somewhere, then there are regional centers, and under regional centers, there are study centers. Study centers are the actual interface between the student and the university. Students know their study centers. They hardly know who works at the main headquarters. Now, if technology has to come in, maybe this 3-tier system has to give way to use of, let us say, satellite transmission. Through the satellite, we could reach all those students while they could be seated in their own homes, or perhaps assemble at some study center. Now, the interesting difference here is that in order to organize counseling or tutoring through this 3-tier system, we spend a lot of money on transport, daily allowances for experts who move on from one place to another place for meetings and conducting programs. So a lot of money is spent on them. But if we use satellite technology, perhaps that money could be saved. But at the same time, to use satellite technology, we have to pay for satellite technology. And the management has to assess the difference between costs and then choose the better option. This is a simple example of managing change. And what are the concerns in managing change? And the last bit that we shall talk about in this context, the major concern, the fourth major concern of management is quality assurance. Here we need to note a difference. So far, people have been talking about in industrial settings or corporate settings, we have been talking about quality control. But somehow the word control seems to be derogatory in the present context. And therefore we talk of quality assurance. This is done by building mechanisms within the entire system. These mechanisms automatically assure the quality of materials, study materials, audio, video, whatever type, quality of the delivery, and whatever else is to be efficient within the system, the inbuilt mechanisms take care of them. Simple example would be, for example, when we think of a new curriculum to meet a new demand. Now, it may be prepared by a single person, but we will have the mechanism of inviting experts, discuss the whole curriculum, the whole outline with them. They will make their inputs and we get a better curriculum. And inputs of this kind are brought in through mechanisms of this type at every stage of the system, which assures quality, and the standards remain what they are. In this presentation, we had 3 points to make. The first point was about the issues that the system of education in India is faced with. And from that on, we moved on to some alternatives that could help us solve those issues. And we identified the system of distance education to see through these problems. And subsequently, we then touched upon at a relatively subtle way, at a subtle level, as to what the concerns of management of education in general are. And prior to that, we had already suggested that those concerns can amply and effectively be taken care of by the system of distance education. Now, in various countries, the basic issues may be very different from what they are in India. The problems of unemployment may not be that acute there. They may be looking for educated people who have the generalistic type of education. But our belief is that the flexibility of distance education system and its management, the variety that it has, can take care of all of them, case by case.